Good afternoon. I'm Eric Auskerson. I would like to welcome you to the AICPA Town Hall Series. We've been conducting this for the past 7 weeks. We greatly appreciate being with you. We've got a fantastic program today, so let's get right into it. Just let me cover a couple of housekeeping items first. We're leveraging this modern platform, which has this toolbar at the bottom. And a couple of things. One, if you're watching this live, you can receive CPE. At the end of the webcast, you will receive an email from us with information to get your CPE certificate. You can also click on that CPE button to receive it. If you're watching the archive version, you are not able to receive CPE. Please do adjust your volume. We also encourage you to ask questions. We've got a team here that are actively answering them, and at the end of, towards the end of the webinar, we will answer broad, themes of questions that we see coming in. We also have a number of materials accessible in the download button. Today's presentation, the recent forgiveness application form, and our forgiveness matrix, so leverage those documents. So this is the group of presenters today. We got a great group. I'm Eric Auskerson. I'm the President and CEO of CPA.com and playing a key role here with the overall CARES and PPP Act. With me is Mark Koziol, who you all know, and he leads the firm services area. So welcome, Mark. We also have a practitioner with us this week again, and the practitioner this week is Erin Roche. She's a leader of a firm in Northern California. This firm specializes in small businesses. She's been finding this to be a real defining moment for her to connect with her clients, play the trusted advisor role, and she's going to be providing some great insights for us. Also joining us is Lisa Simpson, and her team has been building out that resource center on AICPA.org for the PPP program, and most recently, they worked tirelessly in building the forgiveness calculator, which we'll be talking about today. And finally, with us is Mark Peterson. He leads the advocacy area for the AICPA. They've probably never been busier, and he's going to share some of the latest legislative activities that are underway. So here's our agenda. It's the standing agenda we've been using every week. We're going to cover some of the latest guidance, and then we're going to do a deep dive around the forgiveness form, and we're going to have open forum towards the end. So first off, all of this information that we're providing to you today is based on our very active engagement with these different stakeholders in the broader ecosystem. It's been a very, very busy week. The past 7 days, we've been active, connecting with the Treasury and SBA, working with the firms, a lot of work with our payroll coalition, in particular, building out that forgiveness calculator, and we just continue our activities with the lending community. So they're helping us, put all of this information together, and it really is a team effort. When we look at where we're at right now, we're clearly in the forgiveness and compliance phase. It's interesting looking back, the actual loan application form, that came out on March 31st. So 6 weeks later, on May 14th, the forgiveness form came out. We're going to be talking about that. So this has clearly been a sprint week with all of the information that we've had to digest. And we're going to be talking about some more guidance that's going to be coming out very, very soon. It might even come out as we're doing today's webinar. Let's look at some of the latest numbers. These numbers actually have decreased from last week. The total number of PPP loans, that should state 4.39 million businesses. That dollar sign shouldn't be there. And the total amount of loans, PPP loans that have been provided, is at $512 billion. And this is as of 5 p.m. Last night, and that number, that $512 billion number, is $23 billion less compared with you last week. And what has happened is there has been some returning of loans, and we also think there may be something else going on related to the overall calculation at SBA. So, but this is where the numbers stand, and the big takeaway for us is there's still a lot of funding available, and as we now get into what's happening, we think that there's going to be a new increase in applications from small businesses as some of the rules change due to what's happening in the Senate and the House. And we also think that as more clarity is provided around the forgiveness process, that will also drive increased applications. So that's good news. So with that, Mark Peterson, I want to talk to you a little bit about, what's happening right now in Congress, and, two big issues are being discussed that have created a lot of anxiety with the firms and with the businesses.
No, thank you, Eric. Absolutely. And literally, as I am talking to you now, I'm getting a live feed from our sources on Capitol Hill because things are so up in the air. But basically, where we are is there is bipartisan, bicameral, both the House and Senate are interested in providing relief for both, that 8 weeks limitation and the percentages that need to go to payroll, 75%. So the bottom line is we are going to see relief. But where we are right now is the Senate is about to leave this evening for the Memorial Day break. They are trying to hotline, which is a procedure that they utilize in order to move non-controversial issues. But all it takes to stop that is one senator objecting. What they're trying to hotline is a bill that would provide relief up to 16 weeks. It is our understanding and belief that that is not going to happen today. So we believe, as I'm chatting with you right now, that even though there's an attempt going on, that they're going to leave at the end of the day without having done anything related to this relief. Next week, the House of Representatives comes back. They've already teed up a piece of legislation that's been introduced that would eliminate the 75%. It would go from 8 weeks to 24 weeks, and then it would, extend the deadline on the whole program to the end of the year, December 31st. So it is highly likely that when the House gets back, Wednesday, that they will take that legislation up and it will pass overwhelmingly and go over to the Senate. The following week, the Senate will return, and then they'll have to reconcile what that's going to look like, whether it's going to be 10, 12, 16, 24 weeks. Again, I think that the bottom line is relief will happen. It's just when we're going to see it. The other thing I'll point out real quickly, because again, I'm getting live feeds. The Senate, again, before they leave this evening, is also trying to hotline the ability to deduct the PPP business expenses, which has been an issue, again, that has enjoyed bipartisan support. So if in fact they can get that done, that means it will be available for the House of Representatives to pick it up next week, and very, very possible that could be dealt with, and again, highly likely that would be signed by the president. So lots going on, a lot of movement, a lot of different versions of relief, but we are going to see relief. It's just when, Eric.
Yeah, well said, Mark. And when we're speaking with the firms and understanding what the anxiety is with the small business clients, they just want some certainty. And what we think you can be telling your business clients right now is the 8-week period is going to be extended. We've been advocating for that, so that's good news. And there's going to be some flexibility, it looks like, on the 75-25. And what we'll also be talking about as we get into the forgiveness form is, this form, you're not going to be submitting this till the June timeframe, so this will be, you will be able to take this into account, and you can really start planning right now that these things will change, and this flexibility is going to be very helpful to a lot of small businesses, because right now we understand about 50% of small businesses felt they were going to get full forgiveness. With this additional flexibility, that's going to go up significantly. So thanks, Mark. And now bringing in Mark Koziel, and Mark's going to talk about some of the guidance that has come out since our last town hall last week. Mark?
Thanks, Eric. And I wish I had more to report as of right now. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a ton of change, but what we do know today, a couple of new items that hit this week: interim final rule on treatment of entities with foreign affiliates. We don't believe this is going to affect many of you, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you see the question here. Are employees of the foreign affiliate included for purposes of determining whether PPP borrow has more than 500 employees? They said now yes, there's foreign and domestic affiliates that need to be accumulated in that as you do the calculation. But, you know, as we've seen in many of the small business loan applicants that have been out there, Eric reported over 4 million. Of the over 4 million, there have only been less than 1% of those that have been over $2 million in loan requests. So not a ton of companies here relative to the overall big picture. So not going to spend a lot of time here. So if we move on to the next slide, this next rule that we're talking about is FAQ 48. And this deals with the lender, sort of. That it extends the deadline for lenders to complete their SBA Form 1502. What do they do with 1502? That is their request to get submission of their fees and to finalize the loan application through the SBA. Now, this has been an extension of what the original date was. The original date went from May 13th, extends out to May 29th. A lot of this is because the SBA hasn't issued the official form as of yet, and so they're waiting on that. Why do we care about the form that the lender's going to use? Because if that form gets filed, as we reported last week, partnerships now have the ability, if they did not originally apply with their partners included in their application, they could go back and they can adjust their application, including the partners, and still submit. They can do that provided that Form 1502 has not been filed by the bank to the SBA. If it has been filed, they can no longer do that. So that gives us a little reprieve if we haven't already gotten out to our partnership clients or we're a partnership ourselves and we're going to make that adjustment. We have more time to be able to do that. Not a ton, since we're sitting here at the 21st, but there is going to be more time to actually get that done. If we go to the next slide, this next slide was our placeholder in hopes that we were going to see some additional guidance around the application form. Eric mentioned early on
Mark,
that, yes.
And I just said, just checking where you were, I said, let me just check to see if this is dropped. Because, one thing we'll say is like we've had a lot of Friday night drops. We had that 11-page forgiveness application form come out Friday at 7. We had some very good dialogue with Treasury this week. We do know that a large number of FAQs, greater than 25 actually, will be coming out shortly with some IFRs. And it most likely is going to happen before the end of this week. What we can tell you is what we're going to be going over right now with the forgiveness calculator. We think directionally we have a good understanding of where a lot of this is going. So we're ready for it. And yeah, Mark, we built this slide just thinking that it could have dropped this afternoon, but it looks like it's going to be sometime later today or on Friday, the 22nd.
Yep. Thanks, Eric. And with that said, and Eric mentioned, last week they came out with the application. With that application drop, we were through it. Many of you who have been following what we said last Thursday, as we went in, we kind of got a little aggressive last week and said, you know what, Treasury SBA, here's our loan forgiveness application calculator. And with that, if we don't hear from you, we are going to release this to our members. We did that at Friday at 5 o'clock last week. As Eric mentioned, Friday at 7, Treasury and SBA came out with their forgiveness application. At that point, we had pulled our forgiveness calculator so we could reconcile and see where we were. By Saturday at 11 a.m., we had another press release out to say that it's not enough. Eric and Lisa, who you're about to hear from, have been on record PR interviews with various media outlets over this week, asking for a lot more information. As Eric said, we've had dialogue with governmental representatives to talk about what it is that we need to do. We feel incredibly confident. I cannot tell you enough how great a job Lisa and her team did on getting this forgiveness calculator up and running very quickly. There will probably be more changes, as Mark Peterson mentioned, about proposed legislation and the like, but this is going to be based on what we know now. We know in the simplest form, this first page that you see here this is the general process, and Lisa's going to walk us through that and the application as it stands today, but we encourage everyone to please check back to our website regularly. If you're going on to your next application, you have to check back in. That said, based on what we know of what Mark Peterson said, based on what Eric has told us, and we're waiting for these FAQs to drop, we're trying to reduce the anxiety as much as possible. And for all of you, you know what? This weekend, we are not going to see full changes to be able to fill out these applications. So we have time. Tell your clients we have time. There's not much we're going to be able to do until we get that piece of legislation passed, and then we can move on. They can adjust the application as we go forward. So that said, based on what we know today, Lisa, why don't you walk us through this forgiveness application?
Thanks, Mark. We are going to keep this at a fairly high level today because, as you've heard us say, we do expect that those FAQs and interim final rules are going to come out, and they're going to hopefully clarify some of the questions that we know you all have. So again, let's keep this high level. We've got some time. We'll come back into deeper conversations throughout the course of the next few weeks. So to that point, we just wanted to start with the actual forgiveness application calculation page. In case you haven't had a chance to look at it, it's going to outline the basic steps that you're going to end up at. There's a lot of work that's going to go on behind the scenes to get to this page. So this will be, one of the last things a borrower does before they sign the certifications and submit the application. But if you look at it, there's some basic steps. You're going to be asked to accumulate your payroll costs and your non-payroll costs. You'll be asked to calculate and report out any salary or hourly wage reductions. Then you will apply this FTE reduction quotient that we'll talk about a little later. See which one of those numbers is the smallest, because they've also factored in that payroll cost 75% requirement rule that we've talked about. And if you look at the instructions, that is based purely on line 1, your accumulated eligible payroll costs. Then you pick the smallest, and that's your forgiveness amount. We're already getting questions about how EIDL grants factor into the forgiveness amount, and the instructions to the application indicate that the SBA will factor that in as a reduction of the forgiveness amount. We've included that on our calculator that you'll see. It technically does not show on the face of the application. It's in the instructions. If we skip to the next page, again, at a high level, if we just kind of step back and look at what's in those 11 pages, it's really important that if you're going to dig into the forgiveness process, that you read the 11 pages entirely and read them a couple of times, and maybe pull out a highlighter if you're like me. But you're going to see that it comes with instructions and some definitions. We'll hit on a few of those key ones. The calculation form that we showed you previously, that's actually, like I said, the last step in the calculation. Then you've got some certifications that the borrower will be asked to sign off on. You're actually asked to initial these certifications in the application for forgiveness process. So again, we don't anticipate that the CPA will be signing these certifications, but those would be something the borrower would be certifying. They're going to ask you questions like, do you certify that the dollar amount you're asking for forgiveness was used to pay eligible costs? That includes the reductions for the number of FTEs and any salary or hourly wage reductions. That non-payroll costs are not in excess of 25%, And I thought this was an interesting certification to pull out specifically. Does not exceed 8 weeks worth of 2019 compensation for any owner employee or self-employed individual general partner, and it's capped at $15,385. So just an interesting note there. There's some other certifications in there, so I'd really recommend that you read through those. You're also going to get a look at the document requirement, then we'll move into Schedule A, then the worksheet, which is where all the fun stuff happens that feeds into the Schedule A. Then the 11 pages also outlines the documents that you're required to either submit with the application or keep. Just as an FYI, you are asked to retain the documentation for 6 years after the loan is forgiven or paid. Then there's an optional demographic information sheet if you choose to submit that. So if we look at the next slide, I pulled out some of the key definitions. The first one shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. The covered period is the 8-week, 56-day covered period beginning with loan disbursement date. But they did add a twist, which should be borrower-friendly for those borrowers that have a biweekly or more frequent payroll schedule. You can elect to calculate your eligible payroll costs using the 8-week period beginning on the first day of the first pay period after you received the PPP loan disbursement. They give an example in the instructions, so I'd encourage you to read that if you have any questions about it. But again, it's borrower friendly for those who use biweekly or more frequent. We've gotten some questions about why that doesn't extend to semi-monthly or monthly. And we've been advocating for that flexibility. However, we've been told that this was the most leeway they thought they could add to the process in keeping within the intent of the Act and the statutory language of the Act, which does say 8 weeks. So,
and Lisa, just that though, with
yeah.
the pending legislation, that would change that potentially a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. Eligible payroll costs, we got a little bit of clarification there in that it says payroll costs paid and payroll costs incurred during the covered period or alternative covered period. One thing to look out for as you go through the application for forgiveness process is sometimes it will reference the covered period or alternative covered period. Sometimes you are only given the option to use the covered period. So please pay attention as you're going through that. Eligible non-payroll costs, which includes your mortgage interest, rents or lease payments, and utilities are defined on page 2. We got a little bit of a break there in that paid or incurred and paid is now an option. So they gave an option to include those non-payroll costs that were incurred and paid before the next regular billing date. So I think that's an important caveat to include there. Next page. All right, so as I've alluded to, Schedule A is where, the Schedule A worksheet is where the work really starts happening. And you're going to start diving in on an employee-by-employee basis to look at their compensation, calculation of FTEs, and then any salary, hourly wage reduction. This worksheet breaks out 2 separate tables. So in the first table, you're going to include employees who made $100,000 or less in 2019. I'm going to put a little caveat down there based on the way they've described who is one of those employees that goes in the first table. If there were any pay rate or any pay period in 2019 in which the employee would have made an annualized rate of over $100,000, they are going to scoot down to table 2. The main difference there is that employees in table 2 aren't subject to the salary and hourly wage reduction calculation. So they're really focusing on were the were the earnings of employees who made less than $100,000 in 2019 impacted in the covered period. There's been a lot of conversation about what if a person worked in quarter one, because you're going to be comparing wages in the first quarter to wages in the covered period. What if they worked in quarter one but not in the covered period? It's currently our interpretation that you would not include them in this calculation of the salary and hourly wage reduction. You'll also start calculating FTEs on this worksheet. There's a definition of FTEs that SBA provided in the loan forgiveness application process, which uses a 40-hour standard for an FTE calculation, and then you would add up the other hours and prorate them based on that 40 hours. Where they also provided a simplified method with a full-time person being a 1 and anything under 40 hours being a half of an FTE. We are awaiting clarification on what to do if hours aren't tracked for someone. So for example, if you've got salaried employees and they don't track their hours, or if you've got employees who are paid, say in a factory setting, and they're paid by the piece. If you look in table 1, you'll see a line just above the totals that says FTE reduction exception. This was, again, I think a very borrower-friendly option that they've added in, which, and let me clarify really quickly, this applies to both table 1 and table 2 in our understanding. We've had questions arise if you made an offer to a person that you had furloughed and they don't come back. How does that factor into your FTE reduction calculation? So the SBA clarified that for any position in which you made a good faith written offer to rehire during the covered period or alternative covered period, and the employee rejected that, or you had someone who was fired for cause, voluntarily resigned, or voluntarily requested a reduction in their hours, those are not going to count against you in determining whether or not you had a reduction in FTEs. So again, I think that was a good accommodation. Let's get on to the next slide. Again, Schedule A worksheet, where all the fun happens. So if you take a look at the worksheet, you're going to be asked to calculate on a per employee basis. Was there a salary or hourly wage reduction between quarter 1 and the covered period? If on a per employee basis, the compensation was reduced more than 25%, you're going to have to take another step and see if there was a safe harbor that you met, again, on an employee by employee basis. This calculation introduces a term called the average annual salary or wage. And if you've looked at our calculator, you'll see our interpretation of how to compute the average annual salary or hourly wage, and then how to extrapolate that to a comparison, and then over to determining what the 8-week pro rata effect of any reduction is. Then they give you some options on looking at a safe harbor. So a safe harbor calculation is going to ask you to compare the average salary or hourly wage for February 15 to April 26, compare that to what it was as of February 15. It's our understanding that you can calculate that based on the payroll period that includes February 15. You don't have to actually look at what a person made on that particular date. What did it look like for that pay period? If there was a decrease, then you have the option of restoring that decrease by June 30 back to their February 15, 2020 rate of pay. And if you do that by June 30, then that safe harbor is met, and you won't have a wage reduction that will carry over to that table. Clear as mud, right? If you did not restore that reduction, then you're going to calculate the decrease that's in excess of 25%. You're going to annualize it, and then you're going to prorate it for 8 weeks. And that's the number that will carry over for that employee over to the tables that were on that Schedule A worksheet that we looked at. It is, in my opinion, a very complicated calculation, and it's going to require a lot of data. We are working with a lot of national payroll providers because they want to help with these calculations. So they want to help provide the data that will calculate these things for you, and they're working on those at the same time that we're waiting on additional guidance around making sure that our understanding is correct. So,
Lisa, just on that, in our discussions with Treasury, our understanding is there will be a lot of sample calculations shared in these upcoming FAQs to help.
Absolutely, and that's a great point, Eric. We've asked for examples, and we've asked for examples that cover particular situations so that we can truly understand the intent that the SBA had in outlining their instructions. On this slide, I do have to apologize. A line disappeared from the slide somehow between getting over to the final version. So I'll walk through that quickly, and then we'll see if we can get a corrected version of this slide put into the downloads. When you're calculating, so you've calculated your salary and hourly wage reduction, then you're also going to be asked to look at whether or not there's been a reduction in FTEs. One thing to point out is that owner employees are not included in the calculation for the FTE reduction. Calculations are based on total average FTEs, and I've given you the reference there so that you can read through the instructions for that process. And we left out the step that says you're going to compare your average FTEs during the covered period or the alternative covered period to your FTEs in a period that you choose. And that period is either 2/15 to 6/30/2019 or January 1 to February 29, 2020. And if you've had a reduction, then you can scoot down into the safe harbor calculation to see if you have restored those FTEs. And again, there are several different comparative periods to go through that calculation. You'll end up carrying these numbers over to Schedule A, and ultimately the end goal of this, according to the application, is that you're going to come up with a number that says, I have reduced my FTEs by 20%, and that 20% is going to reduce the amount that you're eligible for in your forgiveness calculation, or whatever the number is in your particular circumstance. But they do give you the June 30 safe harbor to restore those FTEs. And again, I think this is where your payroll providers can be a tremendous help for you. Next slide. Again, I know all of this is confusing. We'll have deeper conversations about it, but we just wanted to get a high-level conversation going today as we wait on further guidance. As I mentioned, all of that's going to tie into Schedule A, and that's where you'll start putting all the pieces together. Our calculator, which you're seeing on the screen right now, can certainly help you with that. You're seeing right now the calculator tab, but within the spreadsheet, we've got a Schedule A tab. That's where you're going to accumulate all your eligible payroll costs, your non-cash items like health insurance, retirement, employer payroll taxes. Your owner compensation will flow into that schedule. Interesting note on owner compensation, we mentioned that it was capped at $15,385, but there was another caveat within the Schedule A that says, or 8 weeks of 2019 compensation, whichever is lower. So again, something to pay attention to. And if you use the calculator, it should catch that for you. The FTE safe harbor and reduction quotient is calculated on Schedule A as well. So moving on to our calculator, I wanted to just point out a few things about it. It is being updated on a regular basis. I want to thank those of you who have already taken a look at it and given us your suggestions. We will be tweaking it as guidance comes out, so please don't just download this form and consider it to be the final version. You will just need to bookmark the aicpa.org/SBA site and come back to it regularly. When you open that spreadsheet, you might go, oh my goodness, if we could scoot back just a little bit. You might go, oh my goodness, what is this? But I've got some tips for you. Just make sure that you've got the application handy, and it'll make referring back to the tabs a little easier. We've got helpful hints in the instruction tab. We've got a bunch of notes in there, so make sure that you check on those. Those blue cells that you see on your screen are input cells. Make sure you get all of those entered. Our calculator currently will not calculate your FTEs for you. Given all the different time periods that factor into this, that was going to be, we just wanted to get the calculator out there first. So you'll have to calculate those FTEs at the current time.
Well, Lisa, that was an amazing overview and great work to your team and just great collaboration with many other parties to kind of get that to where it's at. So with that, we want to bring in Erin here to kind of talk from a practitioner standpoint how she's seeing the overall program and what it means to your relationship with clients and these other stakeholders. So Erin?
Excellent. Thanks, Eric, and thanks, Lisa, for that great overview. I know you mentioned a few times these details are changing pretty much by the minute. So I thought I would chime in with just some reflections on kind of the bigger picture considerations that we can keep in mind as practitioners as we're working with our clients in that trusted advisor role. So first of all, I've noticed a tendency with the clients that I'm working with that we've become very fixated on the PPP program and all of these details of what needs to happen for forgiveness. And while those are extremely important considerations, I also have been trying to work with my clients to take a little bit of a step back and also make sure that we aren't losing sight of the bigger picture ideas and what is really going to be the best fit decisions for the business needs of our clients. You know, making sure that we are offering the same type of advice that we would be doing for taxes. You know, tax deductions are great, but you know, buying something on sale that you absolutely have no use for is not helpful. So we want to think about PPP in that same vein, where yes, there are considerations that we can put into play for clients, and let's make sure that it's serving the bigger picture as well. Also wanted to mention that I've had a ton of clients making note that they're getting all of this information online, and even some practitioners and bookkeepers that I'm working with, they're coming to me and giving me feedback on, oh, I heard that this is the newest update, and it is not something that is true. We want to be really careful that our data sourcing is reliable, that it's coming from authoritative sources. AICPA is doing a great job of putting out information on a regular basis and making sure that we're connected with the most up-to-date information available. So make sure that as you're advising clients and working with other advisors, that you're helping steer them in the direction of the information that is going to serve them the best. I've also taken a moment to work with a number of my clients on leveraging this exercise of bookkeeping cleanup to try and support some good business management habits going forward. And to the extent that you're able to kind of make lemonade out of lemons here, looking for ways that you can take this exercise in bookkeeping and apply it going forward so that clients are developing good habits kind of gives them a little bit more out of the process rather than feeling like they've been subjected to some kind of torture exercise. So puts a little bit of a positive spin on things too. I would also say that there are a number of us who are very thankful that we've taken time over the years to develop some deep relationships with our local bankers. I know that I've heard a lot of folks who have struggled making connections with banks through this process. It was a monumental task for all of them to undertake, and by and large, they've really stepped up to the plate and done what they can. But one of the things that I've heard as a takeaway from many practitioners is that where they had relationships with bankers ahead of time, where they had an actual human being that they could go to and ask questions and get things moving, that has been a phenomenal resource for practitioners. So I would say that it's not too late to consider investing in those types of relationships and looking for ways, not just with bankers, but with other complementary service professionals. It's a real value add to be able to go to a client and say, hey, I know that you're struggling with this task that needs to be done right now. I know someone who can help you with that. Let's see how we can get you taken care of. It really helps support that overall trusted advisor relationship that we're all looking to build with our clients right now. I would also mention, I didn't put it in the bullet point here, but I would also say that if you aren't talking to your clients and pushing out to your client base as a whole, the fact that you are there and willing to help them through this PPP process, they are assuming that you are not available for that type of work. I've gotten a surprising number of phone calls from prospective clients recently who have said to me, hey, I really could use some extra support. I don't understand what's going on. I just need someone to hold my hand and walk me through this. And when I ask, well, what does your current CPA do? If they say to me, well, I don't know, they didn't say anything, and I frankly haven't asked. So being vocal and advocating for yourself and making sure that your clients are aware of the services that you do provide and that you would be willing to help them through this is very helpful right now too. And lastly, I would say one of the most valuable resources that I have had in my tool belt through all of this has been my connection to professional associations. I would say that one of my favorite tools has been my PCPS firm networking group. If you aren't familiar with what firm networking groups are, I would strongly encourage you to reach out to the PCPS team. My particular networking group, we're a similar sized firm owner group, has been a sounding board for me through all of this. They've also been a research team for me. They've been there to support my small firm in ways that I would have never been able to take on my own. So it has been a priceless tool in dealing with the immense amounts of information that are coming out over time. Also, Journal of Accountancy social media posts have been a great way to get an early beat on what's happening right now. And of course, these town hall calls are also a very timely and well put together resource for staying on top of everything. So those would be my suggestions for kind of the small firm, how to make it through perspective.
Well, Erin, that was fantastic, and just how you highlighted how this is such a defining moment for you to be serving your clients and acting in that trusted advisor role. So thanks for your leadership, and look forward to having you participate in the open forum in a couple of minutes. What we want to do now is just every week we talk about what's happening with the media. There's a lot going on, and as we've been saying, the media focus continues to shift, and we are seeing more focus on fictitious applications, and we do know that as part of this forgiveness process, more of those fictitious applications will be identified, and that's something that we know that we can play a role in. So Mark Koziol is going to be talking about that in a moment. But we're also beginning to see, positive stories on relief. This is happening more in the local press than in the national press, but at a very high level, 50 million employees have been protected through the Paycheck Protection Program. So there's a lot of good going on. even though, there's frustrations with some of the, issues on the overall program and, need for more clarity. So we're aware of that, and you're playing a role there, but we're also going to continue to see, we think, some more positive press, and that's something that we should all think about. And I think, Aaron, you've been thinking about that from your firm standpoint. But Mark, why don't you talk a little bit about the loan forgiveness matrix and how we see this process with this stage being one where the firms can continue to work with the bank. So as Aaron was noting, the bank relationship's not just about the application phase, it's also about the forgiveness phase. So Mark?
Thanks, Eric. And I believe we introduced this last week, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but we continue to have dialogue with firms. Firms are having dialogue with banks. We've talked to the banking community. And it's really about, this forgiveness aspect on the back end and who's going to do what as far as getting these forgiveness applications processed. So we try to help our member firms by talking about whatever level of service you may be providing to your client today and what the engagement could look like to help in this forgiveness process. And maybe there's some level of agreed upon procedures that's being asked by your client, by the bank, in a variety of aspects. And what does that look like from a service matrix? So in this service matrix that is on our website, Lisa referenced our site before. I'm sure many of you have been out there, AICPA.org/SBA. With that, as you look at this, one of the things to consider is, you have questions, and as the professional that you are going to be able to get through this probably far faster than some in the marketplace, like the banker, like your client especially. So opportunities to create these agreed upon procedures with the various entities. I know some firms have already started to get reach outs from the banking community and their local bank saying that they're not going to have the ability to process all these loans, and can the CPA help? And so all of this is there. There are links inside of this matrix to get you to sample engagement letters, sample AUP reports. It's all laid out for you there fresh. A lot of great information, and we see the CPA as being a critical part of the forgiveness process. Eric?
Yeah, well, thanks, Mark. And again, we've shown this slide before, so we're going to click past it pretty quickly. The self-assessment of need. Last week, FAQ 46 came out, which provided great relief for all the firms and businesses that were concerned about the liquidity test. With that said, you still need to be thinking about the broader client risk discussion, and that there's going to be continued scrutiny here. But we are encouraging firms to encourage their clients to leverage the PPP funding. And we put a blog post out about 10 days ago related to what we felt was too much fear going into the overall application process. But that seems to have been reduced significantly by FAQ 46, so a lot of good progress there. A quick comment about the lender activities. We continue to work with some of the banking leadership. We do know that there's continued frustrations out there on the agent fee. As you heard from Aaron, it's important to establish that relationship with the lender to try to speak to them in advance of any services. But please do continue to bring issues to us, and we are working on that. And we do think with this forgiveness phase, we can continue to build that banking relationship. And by the way, the banks are not being paid for the fee that they're receiving for the administration of the PPP loan until they submit that 1502 form that Mark reviewed. So they haven't been paid yet. So we're going to continue to work on that agent fee item, and we also are going to continue to build a relationship with the lending community. Finally, there's many different relief options available. In past town halls, we've talked about things such as the employee retention credit and Main Street lending. We will continue to talk about those other programs, and there's going to be additional relief programs. We'll be staying active, tracking all that's going on, and we just do think you got to look at the broader broader picture with your clients. So this brings us to open forum. I've been seeing the number of questions coming in. I know Lisa, the team is working hard at answering them. I know we won't get to all of them, but we do leverage these questions to help drive what we put in the Resource Center. So Lisa, do you want to pick a few of the themes out for us?
I do. Aaron, I'm going to start with you. We've gotten a few questions about the networking group that you mentioned, so would you mind just talking a little bit more about your PCPS networking group?
Oh, happy to. So PCPS, one of the resources that's part of that firm membership option, is a resource called the networking groups. There are a number of them now, and I do know that as more and more folks are interested in joining, they do create new groups as needed. It is basically between 10 and 20 practitioners. They group people by firm size and kind of what your overall objectives as a firm are. And it's drawn nationally, so you don't have any local competitors in the room with you, and you get together 2 to 3 times a year, just depending. And you basically operate like a firm association, firm network, but for smaller firms. And we share ideas on how we're approaching practice management issues, employee management issues, and really pretty much everything is on the table. And it becomes a really tight-knit group, great resource, especially if you're working on your own as a solopreneur or in a small group of partners. Really just creates an opportunity to get some great feedback from folks who are doing similar things. Also gives you a place where you can say, hey, I read this sentence. Is this what you understand it to mean too? And the group I'm in has been meeting for just over 4 years now, which seems crazy because it seems both like longer and 5 minutes ago that we started meeting. And it's been an amazing resource. I would encourage anyone who thinks that might be a good fit to look into it.
Thank you, Erin. Another question we've been getting is, when is the forgiveness application due? Mark or Eric, do you want to take that one?
I'll take that because it's a great question that we thought we had a better answer to a week ago. And then in our conversations with regulators, think that it may not be quite accurate. We've been saying that it was due 60 days after the termination of the 8 weeks. Now it appears, according to Treasury, and this may actually be in the FAQs that come out, that there is not a deadline. And they thought that potentially through to the end of 2020 to actually file it. I do think that that is helpful as we're trying to understand exactly what the rush is to get this application in, knowing the application is going to change, knowing that there's this strong possibility of legislation changing the game on 8 weeks and 75-25, that we need to try and reduce the anxiety of our clients around this, tell them there isn't a due date to this right now, and we do have time to adjust to all of that. That said, I think all of us would like to highly encourage all of our members on the phone to enjoy your Memorial Day weekend. It does not have to get done over this weekend. Tell your clients that there is additional information coming, and therefore we cannot do anything over this weekend until we get some level of resolve, knowing that it's going to change this application form. It's going to change how we have to calculate everything. So the calculator, the forgiveness application, all of that would get revised again based on all of these things happening, not today, but probably next week. Not to mention the FAQs, and I keep sitting here hitting refresh on the Treasury.gov website. I still haven't seen them. And I think a lot of those FAQs are going to also answer a lot of the questions that I've been seeing inside of this chat function right now.
And Mark, I know you've been waiting the whole webinar to give the Memorial Day weekend kind of strategy to everybody. But well said. I mean, we know there's going to be more information coming out. One thing that was said earlier by Aaron, social media. You see all of our Twitter handles here. When we get information, we're getting it out, leveraging social media. I think social media has become more important during this pandemic. The Paycheck Protection Loan Forgiveness application form does have an expiration date of 10/31/2020. We mentioned that, but there, with these changes coming out, it does seem like there will be some type of deadlines, and there is this form deadline, and I think a deadline will be helpful at some point, because we're going to want to complete this process. With that said, it doesn't need to be completed this weekend. So, Lisa, maybe one more question, and then we'll go through the closing slides here.
One more question. Mark, you had talked about the forgiveness services matrix, and you mentioned that there was a sample engagement letter. Could you just repeat that quickly? We had several people that didn't quite catch that.
And on the forgiveness services matrix, we talk about agreed upon procedures, doing agreed upon procedures for the client to get all of this information and documentation together, or it could be agreed upon procedures for the bank, who's asking you to help with that accumulation from the bank end and being able to verify the information that's there, the verifying against the payroll reports, whatever it may be. All of that is available through that matrix, so there are sample engagement letters to that. I also did see a question about engagement letters around agent fee, and on the kind of front end of that, you know, we say for every type of engagement, you should have an engagement letter, right? And that's a shout out to our Aon folks and CNA folks to make sure that I said that. But that said, you know, if nothing else, it has to be a conversation with the banker. Eric mentioned about the work that we're doing on the back end to try and encourage agent fees as much as possible, but the banks are not looking for CPAs to just walk in the door with 100 loan applications and 100 bills to say, here, pay me my 1%. And Aaron talked about the incredible importance of having that relationship with the local banker. All of that comes into play. If we didn't have that relationship to begin with, we may have a harder time trying to get that agent fee collected. We're trying to do what we can from our side, but having those conversations up front are absolutely critical, and we say there should be an engagement letter for everything.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Lisa, for moderating those questions, and your team for answering so many of them. Once again, here's the information on the ASBA.org SBA PPP Resource Center. The loan calculator we produced a few weeks ago had 70,000 downloads. I think the forgiveness calculator is going to be in line with that. So leverage these tools, leverage this information. We are updating this on a daily basis, so check in, and please do use the links, as Lisa said. Don't just download these materials, because they are living documents, always being updated. We also have a broader coronavirus tax resource center. Here's the information on that. A lot of good information for you to leverage. Finally, we're going to keep doing these town halls. We're finding them very valuable. You're providing us a lot of feedback. We appreciate the opportunity to spend this hour with you. I appreciate the broader team and the work they do to put together this information on a timely basis. Once again, this is just a defining time for all of us. Thanks for all that you're doing, and we will be, staying in touch through our resource center, social media, and we look forward to hosting you next week at 3 p.m. And thank you very much for your time, and a special thank you to Aaron Roche for joining us and the ASBA leadership team that joined us. That's all for now. Have a great Memorial Day weekend.